I never thought my life could turn so dark in just one evening. Sitting quietly in the living room, I overheard my husband's voice coming from the other side of the door. At first, I thought he was just talking to a friend about business, but then his words froze me in place. "Just bear with it," he said coldly. "She won't live much longer." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Was he talking about me? My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would burst. I pressed my hand against the wall for support, trying to make sense of his cruel words. Then came the next blow. His voice was calm, almost casual, as he continued, "The house will be yours soon, and she comes with it. Consider it part of the deal." My knees grew weak. My own husband, someone I trusted with my life, was selling not just our home, but also me, as if I were nothing more than an object. Tears burned my eyes, but I held them back. I couldn't let him see me break. That night, I realized the man I once loved had already buried me in his mind. To him, I was a dying woman, a burden he wanted to be rid of, but deep inside, a spark of anger and fear began to rise. Maybe fate had other plans for me. When I first met Daniel, I thought I had found the man of my dreams. He was gentle, charming, and always seemed to know the right words to make me feel safe. I was young, hopeful, and full of plans for the future. We laughed a lot in those early days. He would bring me flowers, surprise me with little gifts, and promise me a life filled with love and comfort. My friends envied me, and my parents were happy that I had found such a responsible man. Our wedding was small but beautiful. I wore a simple white dress, and he held my hand so tightly as we exchanged vows that I believed nothing could ever come between us. For years, I carried that image in my heart, a perfect marriage built on love and trust. But life changed when I started getting sick. At first, it was just fatigue. I thought I was working too hard, or maybe needed more sleep. Then came the fevers, the sudden weakness, and the endless doctor visits. One specialist said it could be something serious, maybe even life-threatening. Another told me not to worry, but the uncertainty was enough to shake my world. Instead of standing by me, Daniel began to pull away. He no longer looked at me with warmth in his eyes. His touch became distant, and his words turned sharp. He spent more time outside, claiming he was busy with work, but I often felt he was avoiding me. I needed support, but all I received was cold silence. I tried to tell myself he was stressed, that he didn't know how to handle my illness. But slowly, I noticed the way he looked at me, like I was a burden. The flowers stopped. The surprises ended, and our dinners turned into long nights of silence. The hardest part was watching the man I once loved change before my eyes. I still believed in us. I thought if I got better, things would return to the way they were. I prayed for strength, not just for my health, but for my marriage. What I didn't know was that while I was clinging to hope, Daniel was already planning a future without me. To him, I was no longer a wife, a partner, or even a human being. I was just someone who wouldn't live long, someone he could sell away like an unwanted possession. The truth came to me in pieces, like shards of broken glass cutting deeper each time. After overhearing Daniel's cruel words, I could not rest. My mind kept spinning, trying to believe I had misunderstood him. Maybe he was talking about someone else. Maybe it was just business talk. But my heart already knew the truth. The very next day, I found proof. Papers lay scattered on his desk. Contracts, property documents, and one detail that made my blood run cold. He had signed an agreement to sell the house. But that wasn't all. Scribbled in the margins were words I could barely read at first. She stays until her time ends. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling as I held the paper. There was in black and white confirmation that my husband had included me as part of the deal. He had spoken about me like I was furniture left behind, something to be handed over with the keys. When he walked in and saw me holding the papers, his face hardened instead of showing guilt. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said flatly. His tone carried no shame, only irritation. "Daniel, how could you?" My voice shook, tears threatening to spill. He sighed as if I were a child annoying him. "You're sick. You won't last long. Why should I suffer along with you? At least this way, everything is handled. The man buying the house agreed to take care of you until, well, until it's over. Every word pierced me like a knife. There was no love in his eyes, only relief that he no longer had to carry the weight of my illness. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing the man I had trusted with my vows had not only stopped loving me, he had sold me like property. I was nothing more than a burden he wanted to erase from his life. But deep inside, something stirred, a part of me that refused to die so easily. He might have written me off, but I wasn't ready to let fate be decided by his cruelty. The day I left my home did not feel real. Daniel barely looked at me as he handed over the keys to the new owner. For years, that house had been my safe place, filled with memories of love and laughter. Now, I walked out like a stranger, carrying only a small bag and a heart full of pain. The man who bought the house, Mr. Carter, was nothing like I expected. He was calm, polite, and surprisingly gentle in the way he spoke to me. When I arrived, he didn't treat me like part of a bargain. Instead, he offered me tea and asked if I was comfortable. His kindness was so unexpected that it almost broke me into tears. At first, I couldn't trust him. I kept waiting for harsh words or cold treatment, the way Daniel had left me with. But days passed, and I noticed that Mr. Carter gave me space, never pushing me to talk or forcing me into anything. He made sure I had a clean room, warm meals, and even fresh flowers on the windowsill. Still, the shame burned inside me. Every time I looked at him, I remembered that I had been sold into this arrangement. I felt worthless, like an unwanted burden that someone had been paid to keep. But slowly, something began to change. My body, though weak, felt safer in this new home. My mind, though filled with fear, started to find moments of peace. For the first time in months, I didn't hear harsh words or feel unwanted. It was confusing. How could a stranger treat me with more respect than my own husband? How could someone who gained me through a cruel deal look at me as if I were still a person, not property? I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was clear. Fate had moved me out of Daniel's house and into a place where maybe, just maybe, I could find strength again. Weeks passed, and I began to notice changes in myself. At first, I thought it was just a quiet environment that made me feel lighter. There was no shouting, no cold stares, no heavy silence pressing down on me. But then I realized something more surprising. My health was improving. The constant fever that had drained me for months started to fade. My strength slowly returned, little by little. I could walk longer, eat better, and even sleep peacefully through the night. It confused me. How could a woman who was supposed to be dying soon feel her life coming back? Mr. Carter noticed it too. One morning, as I sat in the garden sipping tea, he said softly, "You look stronger every day. Have you thought of seeing a new doctor?" His words made me hesitate. Daniel had never suggested another opinion. He only repeated the same phrase. "You're sick. You won't last long." I had accepted his voice as truth. But now, with courage I didn't know I still had, I agreed to try. The test results shocked me. I wasn't dying. My illness, though serious, was treatable. All those nights I believed my life was nearly over had been built on lies, or perhaps on one careless doctor's words that Daniel had chosen to believe. Or maybe he wanted to believe it, because it made it easier for him to get rid of me. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I clutched the papers in my hands. Relief, anger, and joy rushed to me all at once. I wasn't weak. I wasn't near death. My life wasn't ending. It was only beginning again. That evening, I stood before the mirror, studying my reflection. My eyes still carried shadows of pain, but there was also a fire I hadn't seen in months. A strength I thought I had lost forever was returning. Daniel had thrown me away, convinced I would fade quietly. But fate had given me another chance. And this time, I would not waste it. I would fight for my life, my dignity, and my future. For the first time in a long while, I whispered to myself, "I'm not finished yet." I knew it was only a matter of time before Daniel came back. When he finally did, his visit was not out of love or guilt. It was out of greed. He wanted to see how his deal was going, whether I was fading away as he had predicted. The moment he stepped into Mr. Carter's house, his eyes widened. Instead of finding a weak, dying woman, He found me standing tall, my cheeks fuller, my skin glowing with health, and my spirit unbroken. For a second, he looked as if he had seen a ghost. You're supposed to be sick," he stammered. I said calmly, though my heart was pounding. But it turns out I was never dying. I was healing. Something you never cared to check. His jaw tightened. "That's impossible. The doctors said—" "The doctors gave one opinion." I interrupted, my voice sharp. "But you didn't want the truth, Daniel. You wanted me gone. You wanted to free yourself." His face twisted with anger and guilt, though he tried to mask it. "You don't understand. I couldn't live tied to a sick woman. I had to think of my future." "And what about mine?" I asked, stepping closer. My voice trembled with both rage and strength. "I was your wife. You promised to stand beside me in sickness and in health. But instead, you sold me away like an object. You buried me alive before my time." For once, Daniel had no answer. His silence was louder than his lies. Mr. Carter, who had quietly stood nearby, spoke then. His tone was firm. "You've lost any right to her. She isn't your possession, and she isn't dying." Daniel's eyes darted between us. Realizing the truth he could no longer control. He had gambled on my death, and he had lost. As he left that day, slamming the door behind him, I felt no sadness, only release. The chains he had wrapped around me with his betrayal were gone. I was no longer his victim. I was free. After Daniel stormed out of the house, I sat in silence, my hands trembling. For so long, I had lived under his shadow, believing his words, carrying his coldness like a weight on my shoulders. Now, for the first time, that weight was gone. The truth had set me free. I was not dying. My body was healing. My spirit was alive, and my future was no longer tied to a man who saw me as worthless. Mr. Carter didn't say much that evening. Instead, he offered me a cup of tea and simply sat nearby, giving me space. That quiet support meant more than any words. For months, I had been starving for kindness, and now I could finally breathe in peace. In the days that followed, I started to build a new rhythm. I cooked small meals, took walks in the garden, and even began reading again, things I had once loved but abandoned when I thought my life was ending. Each small act reminded me of who I was beyond the pain Daniel had caused. I realized then that my story wasn't about being sold or betrayed. It was about rediscovering my own strength. Daniel had wanted me to disappear quietly, but fate had different plans. It had given me a second chance, one I refused to waste. As the sun set one evening, I stood by the window, watching the light paint the sky in shades of gold. My heart no longer ached with despair. Instead, it carried a new promise. I would live, I would heal, and I would never again let anyone treat me as less than I was. That was my turning point, not just surviving, but choosing to live with courage and dignity. Months later, I returned to the old street where my former home stood. The walls that once held my laughter and later my tears were no longer mine, but I felt no pain as I looked at them. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. That place had been the stage of my betrayal, but it had also pushed me toward my freedom. I walked away without looking back. The past no longer held me. Daniel's lies, his cruelty, and his betrayal were nothing more than chapters one had closed. Life with Mr. Carter had become steady and calm. He never treated me as property, never reminded me of the deal that brought me there. Instead, he respected me, gave me space, and reminded me without words that I was still worthy of love and dignity. Whether our bond would grow into friendship or something deeper didn't matter right now. What mattered was that I was alive, stronger than before, and finally free. As I stood in the garden that evening, feeling the cool breeze brush against my face, I whispered to myself, "Fate gave me another chance. This time, I would write my own story. Not as someone's possession, not as a weak woman waiting to die, but as a survivor who had reclaimed her life." And with that thought, I smiled, ready to step into a future that was truly mine.